Welcome to the Planners on Purpose podcast. My name is Naomi Tucker. I'm strategic events consultant and high performance coach. And today I'm joined by Matthew Byrne. Matthew is the founder of Byrne Production Services, and he has over 20 years in the event production industry. He has passion for the industry, and he's all about pushing the limits of what's possible within the scope of events and how to wow audiences. So I'm excited to dig into that a little bit with him today, talk about what makes event production successful, how can we make event production sustainable, and I'm sure a host of other things as well. Matthew, welcome to the Planners on Purpose podcast.
Thanks, Naomi. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So I know I gave a brief introduction about you, but why don't you tell us, how did Byrne Production Services come to be and what made you found this company?
Well, so the story is that, as you said, I have worked in this industry for about 20 years. Back in my lowly time when I had hair and less, now it's all just a gray beard. And so I started in theater and the arts. I was working as a project production manager, stage manager, technical director, and then I slowly but surely transitioned into live events when, the industry was not necessarily as sort of fully formed as it is today. So there was a lot of the people that I ran into in the industry were from the hotel hospitality background that sort of went into live events, and then the other sort of cohort were people like myself who were theatrically trained and were into show production. So I spent a good, at this point, 15 years or so of my career working for audiovisual companies and production companies and small agencies. And so in the fall of 2019, which in retrospect will be considered just impeccable timing, I
Right.
decided I decided to go out on my own and create a company that was a production company first. I had worked for audiovisual rental companies in the past, which their business model is really focused on rental inventory and renting equipment out. And I really thought that there was a sort of niche and a specific area that needed to focus on production and production value. So that's how that started. And of course, then the pandemic happened, and a live event company wasn't going to be very viable at the time. But what we heard from our existing clients and partners was, a real challenge with trying to do virtual really well, and a gap in understanding of how to essentially produce television for their event content.
Yeah.
And so we were very versed in that. I had a small team that sort of stepped in and helped a lot of clients over that period. And then since then, we've obviously returned back to live, and it's been really exciting seeing that transition and holding true to that high production value mandate and being a production company first.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I find that that can be very challenging to be a production company first, especially when we're going through the pandemic phase.
Mhm.
What were some of the challenges that you had? I mean, obviously there was a challenge. I remember myself with just walking clients through what virtual will look like for them, how
Mhm.
it's different than in person, and really trying to get that event production feel on a virtual event. Did you struggle with that as well? And what were some important takeaways from that time frame?
Yeah. So as far as the struggle that we encountered during that period, it was mostly on the planner organizer side, who was getting a lot of pressure from their stakeholders and from their leadership to, take this thing that was this environmental experience for their audience and really dynamic and had such a huge impact on the metrics of the company, which was, getting better sales, building team culture, whatever, or reaching out to their clients and their customers. And so the struggle that a lot of those organizers and planners had was, how do you translate that feel of, being in a room on a stage with a gigantic LED screen in the back, all of those kind of things, into something that fits in a little video window.
Mhm.
And how we helped our clients at that time was to help them sort of transition their content and their story into television broadcast production. we moved away from doing things on Zoom. We like if a client came to us and said, "Hey, we got a big Zoom party," we'd be like, "There's great creative solutions, but that's not for us, and we don't think we're going to be able to help you." But when they came to us and said, "Look, we want to launch this product. We want to talk to our clients and customers. We want to build culture. We want to reward and recognize our achievers." That's where we were able to step in and help them translate that into a different medium. There's a famous Canadian, Marshall McLuhan, who says the medium is the message, and that we took that very seriously. And so we always insisted on working with our partners and clients to make sure that we were always concentrating on production value. And so, I think one of the biggest challenges, certainly in the first couple of months of the pandemic and that sort of extended period that we all
Mhm.
went through, the biggest concern we heard from potential customers and partners was, they were disappointed with what was out there. They knew that they had to elevate, the what the picture looked like, what the framing looked like, what the sound was, the differences in transition moments that you sort of take for granted in a live event because, well, we can just throw some house music on and everybody will
Right.
shuffle and chat for a second. Well, in television production, essentially, you don't have that opportunity. So you have to be very purposeful and meaningful with every millisecond of that and every frame and every moment of music. So we helped a lot of clients sort of build that framing story and that framework around their content and just changed it into a different medium. And so that was one of the biggest challenges. Certainly there were other challenges with, we one of the first productions that we did during the pandemic was the relaunch of the Muscular Dystrophy Association Telethon of Stars.
Mm.
And, there was, obviously health and production challenges in that. Like we had limits to how many people we could put in a studio with the talent. We had to remote in producers from across North America who were meant to be on site but obviously couldn't travel. And to one point we even put part of the video team in a van in the parking lot
Oh,
because we needed the video personnel to be able to route a video signal and graphics and all of those things, but we had a capacity issue where we would normally put the video village. So we had to be very creative about how we route signal and how we build the production infrastructure to get to the end result, which was a professional looking television broadcast of a fundraising event, but also take into consideration the health restrictions that were there at
yeah.
the time.
Absolutely. Wow. You know, what I love about what you said is that you started your company with having event production first. And even though right away it was challenged with going through the pandemic and everyone probably grasping at straws on what medium they're going to use for
Mm-hmm.
elevating their events, you still stuck to that
Mm-hmm.
value that your
Mm-hmm.
company is based off of by saying, hey, no, we're not going to do Zoom. We're going to do this right. So tell me, what is your like the truest definition of event production, and where do you see it being an important element to add to an event? Because there are some event planners that and professionals that really don't use event production. So
Mm-hmm.
break it down for us.
Yeah. So when we say we're a production company first, it's because we are not precious about an inventory, for example.
Mhm.
So audiovisual companies and rental companies, great, are like they are our suppliers. We have amazing relationships with them. They can be very supportive, but their business model is based on, I have these widgets on my shelf, and I need to get these widgets off my shelf to generate revenue. And so because we have some inventory, but it's really geared towards uh, us fulfilling that promise to our clients that we're going to concentrate on the show above all else. We're not precious about our role. We you know and I go back to my theatrical background. In the theater, one day I'm a production manager, the next I'm a stage manager, then I'm directing a show, and then I'm designing the set. So there was always this sort of interchange of, Larry, who I saw on the show last week, was my assistant. And then next week, he's going to be my boss because we're doing a different show. And he got the gig as the producer for the show, whatever that might be.
Gotcha.
And so that's how we've always sort of approached production with our client partners. And we primarily concentrate on agencies, event and marketing agencies, and then a few brand direct when they have that infrastructure in there. But we look at every show or every event as an opportunity to contribute in the most integrated way, which sounds like a little bit of marketing speak, but it's the best way to describe it. So when it comes to um, the sort of production first mentality, that really there are sort of two types of planners and organizers out there. If I can be broadly general, there's
Mhm.
the I know what I need ones, and the I know what I want ones.
Mhm.
And so we a lot of the times, especially on the sort of smaller scale events, or like let's go like low mid to small, that really needs a fulfillment strategy, right? Like I need two screens and a podium and a very small PA. That's really suited for an audio visual rental company. They're trying to fulfill an order. Where we do really well and where we integrate really well is with anything sort of above that, where you need a design element, you need a little bit of showmanship, you need the show is really important. They're the I know what I want. In the end, I want the CEO to walk on stage and blow everybody away for 45 minutes as they launch this product, or if they want to rally the team or get everybody excited about the sales year.
Mhm.
That's where you need production and a production company to come in, because it's about storytelling and environmental design and and getting and there's a lot of complex elements of that isn't just in the audiovisual equipment. It's also in how the stage is designed, what that walking path of the CEO from his chair and or from backstage, like those are really critical decisions that need a production company to come in and say, okay, blank slate, here's what we're thinking that will create the greatest impact. And usually those planners and organizers don't really care about what type of moving light or what type of projector we're using. They just know I need it to be impactful. And I think that's where a production company is best suited to work with your team.
Right. And it also allows that production partner to come alongside of you and get
Mm-hmm.
creative, right? On
Mm-hmm.
just the scale of what can be available to you, seeing that they have that just the resources and maybe even the vision based off of what they've worked with from other partners as
Mm-hmm.
well. So I like what you said. It's like telling the story, it's about the design and about the vision ultimately that that planner would want for their event and you helping them get to that particular point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you get your inspiration for
Mm.
your production? I know you come from that theatrical background. Does that play into it, or what other resources do you look to really inspire your clients?
Yeah, that's interesting. I have always loved the marriage of objective and technology, and then meaningful design. And the way I sort of put it is like the launch of the iPhone many years ago, right? Like that was, let's cram all of these cool things into this little machine. And what was Steve Jobs' thing? It was just, oh, just one more thing. It's
Yes.
also right. And so I think that when it comes to inspiration, I love to look outside of what we're doing in the event industry. We certainly pay attention to what is going on in the world. Usually, I have to admit, it's a lot of European design. The Europeans are miles ahead of us in North America with creativity and pushing sort of those boundaries of creativity and experience design. So I always sort of look at that and sort of look at what everybody's doing in the industry and sort of say, oh, that's cool. I like that. What's interesting about that? But then I also like to look outside of the industry. And I look to, as a perfect example from the pandemic, into television production. We looked into esports production and what they're doing, and what are the award ceremonies for the Oscars doing, or whatever it might be. And then we also look at, experience design for, restaurants and, you know, things that we would not normally sort of directly put into sort of an event box or a happening box. We kind of take a look at that. And then we try to pair it up with one of the three most important things that I think every producer or production company should have in mind, and that is the right people, the right process, and the right technology, all wrapped in meaningful design. And so, if you have those three main things wrapped in meaningful design, that is really based on the combination of what I love about this industry. And what I love about this industry is the marriage of business development and objectives, because I'm a business person myself. I love to grow business. I love to see metrics succeed, all of those things, and meaningful creative problem solving. That's what's really great about this industry, is that we get to come in and listen to a client, speak about their challenge. Like, they're trying to get, their teams to, hit the ground running and increase sales for the year, or they've worked like for years on a new product offering that they think that their customers are going to love, or they just want to celebrate the fact that they just had an amazing year. Well, these are all business metrics. These are objectives of a business to grow, build jobs, whatever it might be. Now I get to take all of my creativity and all of my creative experience and my exposure to art and production, and combine those to elevate that objective. And I think that's the real crux of what makes this exciting as an industry.
Yeah. I love that you said you get your inspiration outside of the industry. And I think that's a very helpful note just for event professionals too.
Hmm.
Just with looking at other things, look at the television shows that you watch, look
Hmm.
at some of the other experiences that you have that are outside of the industry, and see
Hmm.
how you can bring those in
Hmm.
to your vision for your event. That's like
I think
genius.
there's also a dimension of, like, we're looking at VR and AR not as things that we want to integrate into an event necessarily. Every once
Mhm.
in a while, we do get a question of, like, oh, could we put some VR headsets on, and what would that be like? We sort of want to think about that as a audience experience, and what's the real practicality of like how many headsets we need. Anyway, side note. But what we look at when we look at AR and VR technology is, for instance, like, okay, well, what's that experience really doing to
Mhm.
that person? Like, it's
Mhm.
immersing them in audio and video, and it's personalized, and it's got motion in it, right? And it's one of the things that we would consult with clients during the pandemic, for example, that we were like, well, we need to put a camera track in the studio. And they were like, well, I don't understand. Like, I
Mhm.
would think we have like one or two cameras. Like, yeah, but like, we need motion in the image. The mind responds better to your content if it's engaged. And the way that people get engaged is through motion. So what happens in a live event is your CEO walks back and forth on stage, and he or she stops at that particular point when he really wants to emphasize, 500% goal or whatever that might be. Well, in a video production, you have to add that motion in with the camera.
Yeah.
So, as an example, so we would put tracks in, and sometimes when we were going to the wide shot, which everybody might be familiar with, just to get like the whole panel in, we
Mhm.
would actually track that shot from left to right, just so people would have a little bit of dynamism in what they're looking at. And it's those kind of things that, as you said, watching TV, like, we watch TV, and we look at, like, oh, what's going that tracking shot right now? Oh, I like how they did that because it emphasized, the feeling of that character moving across the screen. And so we try to bring that into live event production as well, paired with, I will say, the elevated need since the pandemic and the realization, I think, from the planning community and stakeholders that they need to generate really good video content out of their live events. It's hypercritical. Any brand or any company that's trying to build community to be able to leverage that live event into the other content channels that they're building along the way. And what used to be, stick a camera at the back of the room and do a wide shot of the CEO walking back and forth and doing the presentation, now needs to be at minimum two cameras, and if not more, and some thought process onto post production and what you're going to do with that content, and having that plan in place before you even get to site.
Yeah. You said a whole lot, and that
I
it
sure
was
did.
all.
Sorry, I tend to
No,
rant.
no, but it was in my mind is just, just going off because it really speaks to how important video is, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not just straight video, like you were saying, adding on the elements of making it be more dynamic. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that you can just see this even in YouTube, right? You
Mm-hmm.
just look at some of the channels that are really producing more and have more followers than the other ones, and they're more successful. I feel like it's how they are taking that person on that journey within their content. So bringing that to events, I feel like people come to events really expecting that in the videos that are,
Mm-hmm.
the pre-production videos, post-production, and then even being at the event as well. Video is just so important and should be, I guess, put into your plans,
Mm-hmm.
right? On how you're actually going to be using that video, either to promote the event, after the event, during the event. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
whole other element of planning that
Yeah,
comes
absolutely.
into the picture. How has focusing on that a lot in your business, how has that changed? Because I feel like in the last 5 years, it's
Mm-hmm.
changed substantially.
Yeah, it has changed substantially. I think there was a realization, when we were in the pandemic, and first of all, super crisis of the industry, and I need to shout out to every single person in this industry who, recently I was at an event and somebody asked me about the future and what's going to happen to me, and I refuse to predict because I have been wrong so many times over the last couple of years, but what I said at that event was, look, I'm not worried about us as an industry. We have gone above and beyond to prove that we are resilient, adaptable, and agile. So, I'm going to knock on some wood here that, pending any major disaster like the pandemic again, I'm really not worried about us. We're going to adapt. How it's changed is, so during the pandemic, everybody sort of recognized that, oh, we can take this really interesting content, this community building, this messaging from our leadership, and we can contain it in video production. And so coming out of the pandemic, there was a whole trend. Everybody was the future is hybrid, the virtual all the time, which
Mhm.
everybody was wrong about. And what has settled, in my opinion, is, I'm going to say hybrid, but a sort of hybrid strategy. As I said, gone are the days where you can stick a camera at the back of the room, maybe stream it to Facebook Live, and good enough. Thanks. Let's go out and have a drink at the bar. Now you really have to start thinking about the content plan as part of your event plan, and you know organizers are starting to um, integrate that content plan into their events, and events are no longer sort of a standalone channel that they used to be. Pre-pandemic, they were certainly a standalone channel. You had this events team, whether internally or as a third party, who specialized just in events. They sort of talked about marketing and sales and strategy. That was sort of like a 1 out of 10 was thinking about that. I think that there's more pressure on planners and organizers to be more integrated with those business objectives and to start to position their events as either the launch of or the culmination
Yeah.
of a content plan. And so, if you're thinking of sort of a general user conference, right? You pre-pandemic, I think you could just say, "Hey, we're having a user conference." You would have a general fan base. Maybe you did some advertising and some pre-event marketing, whatever it might be, but that event was the big thing. Salesforce is a perfect example. Pre-pandemic, they were, Dreamforce was this citywide, massive thing, and it certainly still is that big. But now, when you look at Dreamforce and the Salesforce marketing and communications team, they're really leaning into pre-events and
Mhm.
regionals and how do we get people excited year round about the brand and about the messaging and about the community building. And then Dreamforce is the culmination of those things. And then as they go through Dreamforce, they're capturing rich content throughout the 5 days of the event. There's anchor desks throughout the convention center. They are certainly filming general sessions and special events. And then they have a detailed plan as to how they're going to leverage all of that content after the event to build into the content plan and the culmination plan for the preceding year. And so that's where I think things are going in the future. That whether or not you are, Salesforce, which is super massive and has massive amounts of budget to do that, down to I run a parts manufacturing event team, right? That like that has a community. There are people who love your parts and want to be part of the XYZ parts company community. And you really have to start to think about how are we leveraging content throughout the year to make our annual sales conference, our user conference, our customer exhibit, whatever it might be, the culmination or the launch of this community plan. And, the debate's still out as to which one works better, but we've seen it a lot that this media buying plan almost ends up being what drives a lot of the community engagement and gets people to your event and starts to grow that event year over year.
Yeah. Yeah. I do see, I totally agree. And I do see how, um, just with events and just like you said, it's building that whole year of content. It's like that whole community
Mm-hmm.
around that particular event or launch or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're utilizing. Do you see that now event production partners are being engaged for a longer period of time now versus
Yeah,
we need
good
you for
question.
this particular event because of that, because they're leveraging that production and they're leveraging the content and they're leveraging the video
Mm.
over, let's say, a whole year, for example? Has it the
Yeah,
relationship changed?
so there's a couple of caveats to that question. One being, and I think the first part of the question being timeline, and the ironically, no, not a lot of extended timeline for, in our experience, for first timers. When, certainly we're in this weird transition period still, post pandemic and relaunch to live. And, there was this knee jerk reaction when people sort of got back to live. They were like, I remember making a joke that, if I talked to a client about coming out of the pandemic about what we were going to do for the next event, and I mentioned hybrid or virtual, I got threatened with being fired because there was an anti virtual reaction to the entire industry. Everybody was like, no, no,
Yeah, I
no,
had a client that wasn't going to come back unless they came back in person
yeah,
and did not entertain too much virtual at all. Yeah.
yeah, and that's certainly like that's a metric swing that
Mhm.
every disaster will see, right? Like
Mhm.
we were forced to be one way for so long, and now we want to go the other way. The pendulum will swing that way, And now it's interesting that it's sort of settling in. What hasn't caught up yet, and I said for the first timers, so when they realize that, oh, the live only, like the virtual only didn't work, the live only didn't work, now we got to figure out what we're going to do to sort of have a more hybrid strategy going forward. And so what we've encountered is those timelines are still short. So we'll get a call from a client saying, we know we have to do this. We don't know how to get from point A to point B. And oh God, our event is in 3 months. And we go, okay, let's help you as much as we possibly can. What's interesting though is once they go through that cycle of understanding and sort of shortening that knowledge gap in the production objectives and the sort of high value production value, and then start to see that content generating machine that their event can be, that's when clients go, okay, we want to start now. It's day +2 after the event. We really want to start talking about next year's event and how do we elongate that timeline. Again, it's first timers, people who are sort of dipping their toes into that. Those timelines are really short. But then the timelines for the second time around, there's a quick realization that this needs to be a holistic plan, that it can't just be, oh, we'll fill in this gap as we get closer. It becomes more of a unified strategy across the year.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about it even just from a perspective of like even support, knowing that, hey, first time, partners, it can be pushing kind of our limits here,
Mm-hmm.
with being the short timelines. It's almost planning for that extra push to onboard, let's say
Mm-hmm.
this client, expecting that the next time you work with them, the timeline would be much better.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
great. And I feel like it also speaks to how event professionals, when partnering with event production companies,
Mm-hmm.
can be helpful, just making sure that there's adequate time. So hopefully from just them listening to this podcast, they'll be able to see like, wow, I should engage a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
earlier in the process. And that will be able to help them overall pretty much
Mm-hmm.
for, it could be for your whole year of building to that next event.
I was just going to say, look, there's a caveat to that I think planners and organizers within an organization or a third party, they know that they know that they need more time, and but they're certainly getting those economic pressures from
Yeah,
stakeholders and their leadership, that because I don't think it's planners that are driving that short timeline. I think every
right.
planner wakes up and goes, I've got an event in a year. I want all my partners in place now, and I want to start talking to them, but that's being driven, I think, more on macroeconomic things. Like there's a lot of economic uncertainty in the world right
Mm,
now, and
true.
so that's what's primarily driving it.
Mhm.
But it's that first event that when you sort of get into that hybrid strategy, that it trickles up to leadership and to stakeholders, and they go, they start to see the actual return, the measurable return, and the difference between we did an event without a media strategy in place, if that's what we want to call it, and then we did one with one, and now I understand. And great, that's when planners and organizers are really empowered. They get empowered by their stakeholders and their leaders to say, now I get it. Here's all the money and the time that you could possibly need. Hopefully, cross your
Yeah.
fingers.
Yeah.
Sorry, go
So
ahead. I
no,
interrupted you.
no, no, no need to be sorry. So then I have a question on how can event professionals better partner with event services? What can we do to make it easier for ourselves and also have an easier working relationship?
Hmm. Yeah, so I go to there's a great Canadian market positioning expert named April Denver, and she wrote a book called Sales Pitch, which I give to my teams all the time and say, like, you need to understand this, if
Okay.
only for the first part of that book. And she tells this great story about imagine how difficult it is to buy a toilet. And so she goes into the story about needing to renovate her bathroom and going off to the Home Depot because the contractor said, I need a toilet because we're going to finish today, and getting overwhelmed by choice. And then she goes back and forth, and she finally gets into a conversation with the salesperson who says, look, here's how to buy a toilet. And I use that story to demonstrate, especially in this industry, that buying those services and fulfilling those needs is very difficult and very overwhelming. It's highly specialized, and there's a lot of complex factors into that. So I think planners and organizers need to understand what they don't understand and then be open and honest with their potential partners and understand how to buy in this industry. As I said, it can be very overwhelming. There's too many options. You look at any of the major markets across North America where production services or audiovisual or show production service, like whatever they may call themselves, which there is no standard, can be extremely overwhelming. So my advice is always to be transparent, open, honest, be clear about how you need to buy and what you need to buy. And going back to the April story about buying a toilet, when she talked to the salesperson at Home Depot that clarified everything, he said, "Here's how you buy a toilet. Like, how big is your bathroom? How is it your main bathroom or is it your guest bathroom? Do you have a big family? Is it just you? All of these kind of things." And through all those questions, was able to like narrow everything down to sort of three or four choices, and then say, well, like this one's like designer color. It's super expensive. This one's a workhorse. It's a what you would put in a basement bathroom. I kind of think you need to live in the middle of the road here. This is like a nice white, American standard toilet. And she was like, "Yeah, that's the one." And it was a 20-minute process for her. And
Wow.
so I think that the best way to integrate with a production and or an audiovisual company or whatever sort of lives on that spectrum is to be really honest with yourself as to, okay, how do I buy? And ask those potential partners, well, how do I work with you?
Yeah.
You know, I a lot of planners will be very protective of things like budget and scope and objectives because they are a little worried that they're going to be proposed something that is like just trying to grab the budget as much as possible. I
Yeah.
always like to debunk that, right? I want to match budget to objectives and the feasibility of a production solution. And so you got to be transparent with those things. You have to say, look, we're going into this big thing. It's not the biggest event we're going to do this year. It's more functional. It's internal teams, and I have a limited budget. And here's the number that it needs to come in at, right?
Yeah.
Production people we're working with a client right now who has very small events across North America, and but their real objective in going to RFP or seeking a solution, we after a few detailed questions with them, we realized that they weren't looking for necessarily production value, quote unquote. What they were looking for was consistency and like a minimum level of execution standard, so that it was consistent no matter where they went. Every little event is like 250 odd people in a generally mid-tier luxury hotel in a room that's maybe 10,000 square feet, right? It's not the big LED screen, it's not flashy bang music and all that kind of stuff. So the way that we approached it was to say what you really need is a person that you can rely on to be able to maintain the design intent, the
Yeah.
production standard, and be a good steward of your budget. And so we actually made a deal because they originally came out to us and said we're using in-house production or we're using sort of local mom and pop AV shops wherever we go, and we're finding that it's hit or miss. We go to Phoenix and it's this way, we go to Vegas and it's this way, we go to Orlando and it's this way. And so what we proposed to them was we're going to give you a person, and that person is your technical producer. And their whole job is to maintain those three key points of the standard of your show so that no matter where it goes in the world, it looks the same, it feels the same, the experience is the same. Your speakers have consistency of knowing that Jim Jim is my guy. I can always contact Jim about my concerns, whatever it might be. But then we negotiated better deals with local suppliers. So even if they were going into the hotel where there's an exclusive in-house deal, well, we hold that in-house supplier to the standard of production that that client wanted to have, rather than leaving them on their own and saying, well, we don't have like two 8K projectors in Phoenix, Arizona, so that doesn't seem worth it to us. That's not how we approach things. We approach it like we're a partner. We're there to help you with the technical and production elements of your event to make sure that it's consistent and it's of your brand standard, the same way that you would look at a marketing agency partner. That though, like, it doesn't matter if they're in Istanbul or if they live in LA, you want to know that your website is always consistent and your communications are and your email blasts and whatever it is. Live events are such a vital channel to marketing and business development for any brand that you want that consistency and that stewardship. And if you can't have it in your team, then going to a production company, that's the way you can achieve it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that definitely helps event professionals understand here's what a partnership looks like, being transparent, being open as much as they can in order to identify who that partner is. And I think a lot of event professionals, they probably don't show all their cards because they have been burned in the past. And that's unfortunate. But getting that partner that really will show up for you in the way that you would describe really
Mm-hmm.
comes with being transparent and open and
Mm-hmm.
sharing where you want to go and what you have to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, there's a great TikTok meme of like, I think it's this woman sitting at a counter, and the tag is always like, when you finally meet a nice guy, and the guy's phone is on the counter and it dings. He says, oh, somebody just texted you, and he looks back and says, oh yeah, just here's my code. Open my phone and look at it. And she looks at him like, that's so crazy. We understand that sometimes clients have been through toxic relationships with suppliers and with partners. And, I think it's really important that when you're vetting those potential partners, that they can answer those questions of like, if, to put it in a slightly sarcastic context, would you let me look at your phone, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And those are like deal breakers for and we hold our clients and our partners to that same standard, right? we
Yeah.
don't we don't hold things back. We are clear and open with our feedback. We want the relationship to work,
Mhm.
and you know so that leads to some sometimes difficult conversations, and open and honest and vulnerable conversations that we have with our clients and our partners. But I promise you it will pay off, because every time we sort of get into that conversation, we discover some real motivations from their stakeholders, from the teams, from the person who is our direct contact, who's worried about perceptions or budgets or whatever it might be. But once we have that open and honest dialogue, my God, does it skyrocket the success of those events.
Yeah. I mean, because they're being
Mhm.
vulnerable with what they have need to get there. And
Mhm.
then that establishes that trust and it just
Mhm.
continues to build from there. And I think
Mhm.
that's why when you do find that amazing event production partner that really can understand where you're coming from, that can
Mhm.
help you with all the vision, everything, it's really hard to break loose.
Yeah,
You have a
absolutely.
partner for life pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we're wrapping up our time and this has been great. I wanted to just ask about budget. We talked a little bit
Mhm.
about it, but I know that when we were going through the pandemic, in order to do virtual event production and then going into in-person event production, many clients were like, "Oh my goodness, this is this is super expensive and how do we manage our costs but then also stay relevant when it
Mhm.
comes to how our event is designed and how it looks." Can you share just some maybe tips, maybe insight tips on how planners can ease their financial strain
Mhm.
when it comes to event production? What are some other ways or that they can look at it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we get very often. So there's two parts of it. One, Look, the reality is that the costs for things like labor, some equipment costs, have just sort of ballooned. Ballooned
Mhm.
is not necessarily the right word because I think, especially in the on the labor side, those have actually settled to what they should have been. And there, as I said, especially when it comes to audiovisual lighting, rigging, staging, production, those are highly, highly specialized professionals who work for years and years and years on developing those skills to be at that consistent professional level. So the labor I don't think is going to adjust very dramatically down or up in the next couple of years. Equipment costs I think are going to come down in the next couple of years once we get past the sort of AI infrastructure revolution, because the reality is the same materials and expertise that go into building a moving light also go into building media processing servers for AI platforms.
Really?
Yeah, it's all microprocessors and computer systems, and so that's global supply chain delays,
Mhm.
all of those kind of things that are still we're still sort of dealing with. So as far as those costs, I think as we get better, as those infrastructure costs are developed, the U.S. government is investing billions and billions of dollars into semiconductor factories in Phoenix and across Arizona. The manufacturing is starting to catch up to demand that was devastated during the pandemic. So there's that aspect. The the expectations have certainly risen over the last couple of years. We talked about it earlier in this conversation about you can't get away with one camera at the back of the room anymore. So those costs are going to rise. What I think is really key, and I sort of tease people about this sometimes, that when we will hear from a client who's like, "Oh my God, I can't imagine spending X amount of money on a 3,000 person event at the convention center for my customers and my clients," and then I point out like, let's go talk to people at Apple. And when you say you do an event for 3,000 people for a like 2 or 3% of their budget, they would go, how do you do that? Right. So, but Apple doesn't see that as a loss leader. They don't see it as a inconvenient expense. They understand that, look, if we want to reach $20 billion in sales annually, we're going to have to spend 0.001% of that, which translates to about $3 or $4 million on our annual worldwide developer conference. I have no idea what the real numbers are. I'm just making them up right. So I think that there needs to be a shift in that dollar return. We as an industry have gotten certainly much better over the last few years about measuring true results and metrics that show the return on investment. We're moving away, like not completely, and I don't think we should ever move away completely from sentiment based demographics, which are net promoter scores and all of those, to understanding the true strategic long term metrics that take a sales meeting for example.
Mhm.
You could spend millions and millions of dollars on this amazing experience for your sales team, through presentations, through incentives, through recognition, fancy dinners and limos and all the things. You won't see those results until next year's SKO. Like we now understand this, and the leadership and stakeholders now understand it a lot better because we now have sort of 20 years in the industry of recording these metrics and say, you didn't have an SKO, your sales fell. You did have an SKO, your sales skyrocketed. So as far as budget goes, there's to me the trick is really understanding what your measurable return will be and concentrating on those metrics. And then it's really about being strategic about how you allocate that big bucket of money, right? That there are ways you can leverage creative thinking and problem solving, strategic design, instrumentation, like in production, instrumentation choice that says, hey, this is a moving light package, but it doesn't have to be the Oscars moving light package. We actually we quantify, say, lighting as an example into four major categories, and that's consumer, prosumer, professional, and premium. And
Mm.
so consumers on the very low end of the cost bracket, it's I don't know if you guys have this in the States. It's called Long and McQuaid. It's a music store. They sell some lights, and those are consumer grade. They are meant to be in your backyard. They're flash and trash. They're very, very expensive.
Mhm.
Most Some smaller end AV companies will stock what we call prosumer, which is a step above that, a decent price point, but not super functional. Professional, obviously, high end functionality, a lot of parameters that you can use to affect meaningful control. And then, of course, premium fixtures are like the whatever they're using in Hollywood and Oscar presentations. So understanding that that's sort of the four buckets that you need to go, like you can be very strategic and ask your potential vendor, okay, where does your inventory sit? Is it in the, and most of that is prosumer, professional, or premium. And there
Mm.
are some suppliers that are extremely heavily inventoried towards premium and high end, or professional, and or professional down to prosumer. And so those, when you're looking at your event and you think to yourself, okay, well, I need a moving light package because everybody likes to move, like the beams moving back and forth and so on and so on. I have some limited budget. You can talk to your production team and your potential AV suppliers and say, look, could we achieve this with some prosumer grade lighting, for example? And most of the time, unless they don't have any of that inventory because they're a high end or a premium
Right.
AV company, they'll probably say, "Yeah, absolutely, I have that." That's a great solution, and that will. I'm going to rob Peter to pay Paul because you need two more cameras. And there's
Mm.
ways of balancing those fixed costs versus variable costs. Like there's a lot of strategy that goes into that. Again, I
Mhm.
go back to the question that we were just talking
Mhm.
about how to buy, and it comes into being vulnerable and being open and saying, look, I have a limited budget. I really want to have this impact. What are your suggestions, and how can you be a strategic partner to help me make those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's lots of great insight and helpful tips with starting the conversation for event professionals that sometimes when you get quotes and get, just different responses to
Mm-hmm.
RFPs, many times some of the things planners probably do not understand.
Yeah.
Right? So just making sure that they walk through it, understand it a bit more, asking the right questions like you said can really help
Mm-hmm.
them get a step closer to having the event be a
And
success and
And
look
I'll just
well.
say, sometimes the right question is not actually a question. It's just an admission of,
Right.
I don't know. Tell me what I should know. And
Exactly. Yeah.
I think a lot of planners and organizers are afraid to be that vulnerable. And I I have to say, after 20 years in this, close to 25 at this point, years in this industry, that it pays off so much when somebody says, "I don't know what I don't know. Tell me, like, help me navigate this process." And we are always willing to help. And that, I think that's the measure of a true professional, to be honest. That
Yeah.
whether or not, and sometimes we do that with our suppliers. I go, somebody used some acronym the other day about, like, oh, we're going to use a blah 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 system, and I went, okay, I don't know what that is. You're like, and it became obvious. I was like, oh, I understand what that is now. Thanks very much. And now I can make a better informed decision. I can advise my clients better and my teams and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it. And so if you can, if as a planner or producer or organizer, if you can come to the table with that sort of candid vulnerability, oh my
Mhm.
God, is it going to pay off tenfold down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for just sharing your expertise, sharing just how we can partner better, what
Mm-hmm.
a great event production partner looks like, and how in doing that can really pave the way for sustainable, I guess, future in
Mm-hmm.
partnership. So
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you are dying to share that we did not get to today?
No, no, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. It was so lovely to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you share how people will get in contact with you if you want to learn more about you or the services that Byrne Production Services has?
Absolutely. So very active on LinkedIn. We primarily concentrate on business events. So, a business social media platform seemed like the best place for us to go rather than Twitter or Facebook. So LinkedIn, you can find us under Byrne Production Services or just look me up, Matthew Byrne, CSEP. I am searchable there. And of course, our website is www.byrneproductionservices.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. Before I let you go, I usually have like a fun round with everyone
Mhm.
that's on the podcast. And
Yeah,
if you have time, I would love to
of
just
course.
maybe ask you a couple quick questions.
Yeah.
The first question is just tell me what the most exhilarating event that you had an opportunity to be a part of. We would love to just know about what that event is and how it impacted you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So there was this event, we were doing the opening ceremony. This is like 2015, 2014. We were doing this opening ceremony for, it was the International Aeronautical Congress, which is space technology. Like, yeah,
Okay.
if Elon was around at the time, he would have been the keynote. Like, and so we did this opening ceremony in a theater in downtown Toronto, so very intimate, very sort of dark, and in the theatrical production, you want people to be comfortable and sound like everything was sort of cramped in. And the theme was we need more space, like more space technology, more space investment, so et cetera, et cetera. So but we were like, how do we create more space in this, generally cramped theater? And so we devised an idea where we put up this gigantic projection screen that was panoramic and curved a little bit, so that it created a real sense of sort of a 3D environment. And what we mapped out the back wall of the theater on this image. And what really sold it is we hired an actor to walk back and forth on stage like he was fixing the lights, which were just sort of lined up against the edge of the screen. And it really looked like there was nothing on stage. And because, again, it was sort of work lights on in the background and this person walking down in front of the screen. So people like I was sitting at the front of house booth calling the show, and I heard people as they walked in going, "Oh, well, they didn't do much. Oh, well, this isn't very exciting," et cetera, et cetera. And then we had this round stage with the big logo on the center. And so the keynote speaker came on to introduce and say, "Oh, hey, welcome to the Congress, and we're launching, 5 days of conference." And he said to himself, to the audience, "Hey, the theme of this is we need more space, but this feels a little cramped." And we had designed a cue so that when you walked up to the screen and touched it, a little ripple effect happened, and it transitioned into a star field in deep space. And we flew through the solar system until Earth rose on stage. And there was an audible gasp from the audience. There was a, "What just happened?" And it, like, to this day, is one of my favorite moments that we've designed. That I was just like,
Wow.
there was that sense of surprise and delight,
Mhm.
theatricality to it. Well, that's one of my proudest moments in my career so far.
Wow, that's awesome. I can just see it now. I had an opportunity to go to David Copperfield on stage and I was like,
Mhm.
wow. So I really can imagine exactly
Yeah,
how
yeah,
it could have been.
yeah.
Yeah. My next question for you is you had mentioned the roles that you typically
Mhm.
had between all the people that you would work with. Have you ever been a part of a theatrical set? And if you had, what was it in terms of on stage actor?
Oh, have I ever been an actor? Oh God, I was a terrible, terrible actor in college. My last show that I did, if I can remember back, was called Trelawney of the Wells. It was a mid-century English play that had 7 acts in it. It was very ridiculously long, and I was known in my conservatory theater school as the ham. It was a bit of a, I would choose scenery, as the
Oh,
term goes, and they ironically, there's a part for this Irish stage manager who's loud, boisterous, and interrupts. Like, it was supposed to be comedy relief because the Trelawney, the main character, is having a very serious emotional conversation with her, au pair lover or whatever it is, and the stage manager bumbles in and chews up the scenery, telling her she needs to go to. That was the last time I acted, and I think the world is a better place because of
Oh.
that. Yeah.
Oh man, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. It's been a pleasure to just have you on and really just talk about all of this. Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing those fun tips about you.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining the Planners on Purpose podcast. Until next time, stay on purpose.